the committee meeting of the Utility Finance Oversight Committee. Could we have a roll, please?
Vice Chairperson Bennett, Member Bowling,
Here.
Member Scott,
Here.
Member Spell.
Here.
Quorum is present.
All right, do we have any public comment? Evidently not. So, so at this point in time, let me move on to the minutes. Did everybody have a chance to look at the minutes, and are there any corrections or amendments? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Committee Member Bruce Scott, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. All right, so we have the minutes. Let me say right now that for those who are at home and haven't looked out the window, we're having extremely bad weather, very high winds and heavy rain, which may turn into snow. And so depending upon how long the meeting goes, I may decide to pull item FE. I think, is that what it was? Excuse me, item 3F. It's 3F. To pull item 3F, which is discussion about this committee. Is it 2F or 2E? 2F, okay.
2E.
2E. And we can do that at the next meeting if we don't get to it this meeting. So we'll see how, time-wise, how everything goes. So let's move on to the presentation on the enterprise funds and the new financial policies. So Sherry, you and Mike doing that?
We're on 2C.
You know, before we do that, let me go back. I'm sorry, I'm a little discombobulated. Could everybody in staff introduce themselves, please? And we'll start with Iris.
Iris Yale, District Attorney's Office.
I'm Sherry Russell. I'm the CFO.
Pamela Ganger, Deputy CFO.
Andy Hummel, Wastewater Utility Manager.
Eddie Qualieri, Water Utility Manager.
Darren Schultz, Public Works Director.
Great, and we have somebody new here?
Yeah, we do. Andy Hummel is our new Wastewater Utility Manager. That, as you know, we went through the reorg starting July 1 and changed the way the department looks and established a separate standalone water utility group as well as a wastewater utility group. So Andy has joined our team about a month ago. A little more than that, maybe, actually. A little more than that. Time's going fast. And comes with a wealth of experience. He comes to us from the city of Sparks, where he was the utility manager there. So we're very, very excited and lucky to have Andy join our team.
Well, anybody with the name Andy has to be pretty good. So, and I believe one of you is from the PUC. Has worked at the PUC?
Yeah, I worked at the PUC in a previous life for 4 years. I actually worked with Pam there.
Right. Okay.
So
I think that will be very helpful experience to move on with the way.
Definitely.
So, welcome to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we met at a previous meeting. My mind isn't working on it. But my mind isn't working all that well today. I'll be sure we get that on the tape.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, right. A couple of times. All right, now let's move on. Sherry, you want to take this?
Sure. Again, Sherry Russell for the record, CFO. So we are getting ready to take the financial policies to the Board of Supervisors, but we are looking for your recommendation regarding the enterprise funds. With a meeting with Mike Spell, we did work on these a little bit to segregate water and sewer, as they have a little more strict of a standard on their operating reserves. And then we also added in the debt section, I think it's on page 6, number 13, we added the debt to equity ratio goals in there as well. The rest of this hasn't changed a whole lot from the policies you saw, I don't know, a year ago. if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Sherry, we appreciate the work and the coordination with Mike on this. I'm just a little bit confused about under the cash reserve and the operating reserve, the statement, the citywide funding level shall be a minimum of 30 days or 8.33% to a maximum of 90 days, 25% of annual operating expenses. Removing the percentages, it could be just a vernacular and jargon of utilizing days of expenditures as opposed to a percentage. But those numbers are, for example, 30 days, that's 30 days or 360th of the annual expenditures, is that correct?
Yeah,
Which is 8.33%.
so we basically take 100% times 12. That's 8.33% each month.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify. I found it confusing. Maybe it was because of vernacular.
Maybe.
Thank you. On the next item below operating reserve is the capital project reserve. And one of the last sentences, it is the last sentences in that first paragraph, the funding level shall be a minimum of 2% of the total original cost of fixed asset. Is that the same as the original construction cost?
Yes. So we don't want to take into account depreciation, basically. So whatever the original cost is times 2%, that's our floor.
So the only time that number would go down is if assets are removed from the system?
That's correct.
Thank you.
With regard to capital projects, towards the end, we'd have a capital improvement program policy, which has the committee and that sort of thing. Now, that does not affect the enterprise funds, is that correct? Those are handled separately from a capital improvements budget perspective?
Yes, so that's our, we will spend the capital reserves, theoretically, on those capital projects in the next year. So the reserve is there, it has to be there at the end of the year. But then we move forward and pay as you go some of those capital projects. The idea is to use less debt so we can actually start funding our own capital. But that is a separate section that is really separate from the enterprise funds.
Okay, so the enterprise fund capital improvement projects are not handled through the same process. I mean, obviously they have to be approved, but they're within each enterprise fund, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Going to the cash basis and staying away from debt, how does that affect the rates?
Well, anytime our equity looks better, we should get like a better bond rating. The rates that we set, we did so for the user. We did so in order to pay down some of that capital as we go, so that we don't have to do this again in the future, raise rates enormously. So the idea is to definitely pay capital with some of those rates.
Thank you. Mike, would you discuss this a little bit from your perspective? I know you went in and met with Sherry. Why this was important?
Why the fiscal policies are important? Well, first of all, because we had the study that laid down the policy that they wanted the water and sewer funds to follow. Any governmental organization should have system-wide policies and procedures for financial management, which they already had. Well, after the study, they generated them more specifically for the enterprise funds. The reason we went and did this amendment to this program is that the first attempt was very confusing as far as what the reserve balance is for, what the operating these were all, they listed it as each, like the system reserve was a fund in itself. No, it's embedded in the capital reserve fund. And just like bond proceeds must be embedded within that. So you really only have two fund balances. You have your operating reserves and then your capitalization. But originally, it looked like we had about 6 different fund balances. So it's taken us a while, but we're finally there. And I also want to thank Pam, too, for giving us a lot more information on compliance with breaking down the each account and showing where the amount of unspent bond proceeds in the fund. She's given us everything we really need to see on how they are determining compliance with all of our reserves from that statement. So it took us a while, took us 4 years, but we're there now, I think.
Thank you, Mike. I really wanted that for the benefit of the public so that they would understand why we're doing what we're doing. So I appreciate that.
May I make one more comment, Madam Chair? It didn't come up. I expected it to, but it didn't come up. This is a citywide policy, so we have 6 enterprise funds. This entity is only over 3 of those funds, and I just wanted to put it on the record that these financial policies, all of our 6 enterprise funds are in compliance with them.
Great. That's wonderful to hear. Okay, are there any other questions or comments from the committee or from staff? If not, then this was for information. Oh, no, we have to take action on this, right? Okay. Do I hear a motion to recommend these policies to the Board of Supervisors?
I move that we recommend the revised policies, financial policies, to the Board of Supervisors for approval.
That's first from Mike Spell. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second from Bruce Scott. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None? Okay, great. Then we'll take this to the Board of Supervisors. Pardon me?
Did you ask for public comment? There's no public, but I don't know.
Well, yeah, and we don't have to.
Okay.
And had there been anybody in the public, I would have called for public comment.
Very good.
But the only person out there doesn't exist as far as we're concerned, so.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, well, Ann knows what I'm talking about, that she's not one who get up and gives public comment, so, so she's invisible observer. So that's how the press looks upon it. All right, let's move on to the next section, which is Pam.
Thank you. Pam Ganger, Deputy CFO. And I'll take you through a fiscal summary of water, wastewater, and the stormwater drainage funds, starting with the sewer wastewater fund. I'd like to point out, first of all, before we get too much in depth into these, that these are, the numbers we're talking about today are year-to-date actual numbers and technically still unaudited numbers, as the financial statements have not yet been presented to the Board of Supervisors yet. That's due to be done on December the 6th. So the numbers we're talking about are most likely will be our final numbers, and we don't expect any changes, but I just have to note that the Board of Supervisors has not approved these yet. So. And so with that, starting with the sewer fund, I'll note that just kind of starting with our revenues, if you take a look, you can see that our total revenues are higher than budget by about $1 million overall, and the majority of which comes from developer contributions and connection fees, as well as charges for services. In the expenditure section down below, we've had overall we had a total total increase of expenses over budget by $886,000 approximately. And that's due mostly to an increase in employee benefits, which has to do mostly with our OPEB and PERS expenses. We had a couple of governmental accounting standard changes that had to be implemented, and that resulted in higher than expected expenses for benefits. We also had an increase in depreciation, mostly due to the timing as well as the estimated useful lives of some of our equipment and buildings in the sewer fund, which resulted in an increase in to our depreciation expense, which, as you know, is that's an estimate anyway, but this year our estimate was off the mark in that regard. So that resulted in total expenses over budget. We have overall a positive change in net position of $2.9 million. And taking a look from a graph view of our financial policies for the sewer, as you can see that the line going across is kind of our bar, our benchmark. That's our goal. And then the bars going up and down are what we actually came in at. So our 45-day operating expense goal was $767,000. We more than met that with our cash needs. In our capital reserve, which is 2% of capital assets, that goal was $1.9 million, and we exceeded that by quite a bit at $17 million. System reinvestment funding is a similar calculation of capital reserve. It just removes bond proceeds, and we had about $4.7 million in bond. I'm sorry, what was our? I don't remember exactly what that was. Sorry, I don't want to throw out the wrong number there, but our goal for system reinvestment funding was about $4.7 million, and we met that with $12 million. Our debt to equity ratio meets the goal. Our goal is 50-50, and we were 49 debt to 51% equity, so we met that goal. And then our debt service coverage was 1.0, and we met that with 2.1. So the sewer fund is meeting its financial policy obligations there. Moving on to the water fund.
Excuse me, Pam.
Yes.
Just for the benefit of the public, when we talk about developer contributions, we're not
Yes.
talking about contributions in the usual sense of the word. They're not handing us money.
Exactly. So developer contributions are, let's say, for example, a developer will come and develop a section of land either in with housing, for example, and they'll put in some infrastructure underground, for example, water pipes and so forth. And then when they're done with the project, they contribute that to the city so that we can maintain that for the residents.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead.
You're welcome. Okay, so moving on to the water fund, we had total revenue of $16.8 million, higher than budget by about $845,000, and that's mostly from developer contributions, connection fees, and charges for services. Our total expenses saw a decrease from budget of $693,000, which is mostly due to savings in services and supplies, and then of course, just a note, our benefits again were higher in this fund as well, also due to our PERS and OPEB governmental standard changes and adjustments that we had to make related to that. So overall, the water fund had a net position increase of $3.5 million. And looking at it from a financial policy perspective, we have in the water fund, we calculate an operating reserve using 60 days. And so that was $1.2 million, which we more than met that. The capital reserve goal was about $2 million, and we more than met that. The system reinvestment funding was $3.3 million, and we met that goal as well. Debt to equity ratio, it's better than prior years, but it doesn't quite meet our goal of 50-50 again this year. And next year, it's going to be worse because of the fiscal year 19 bonds, the $10 million that we received in August, as well as the $7 million bond proceeds we're expecting to see later this year.
Let me comment on that, if I might. Sorry to interrupt you, Pam.
Sure.
But, that's something, I remember when Mike Spell made the motion to move ahead with that bond, which was really a great efficiency action on the part of Public Works, and that we were being able to really utilize money in the way I like to see it done. And Mike said at the time, with much stress in his voice, it's going to hurt our ratio, but it's well worth it. And I think we all agree with that. So, yes, the ratio looks terrible, but for good reason.
Right, and just as a comment on that, the way this particular debt was structured is that we actually don't pay off the old bonds for a couple years. So although our debt to equity ratio looks awful right now, and it will for the next couple of years, but when we pay that bond off a few years down the road, it will reverse, and we'll be looking good again in that regard. So it's just temporary. And then our debt service coverage is 1.0, and we met that with 1.6 in the water fund. So moving on to the stormwater drainage fund.
Pam?
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to point out, for the committee's sake, is if you had a chance to look at the cash balance for the water fund, and this is a concern of Darren's, I know now too, after talking to Pam. It looks like we have a really healthy cash balance.
Okay.
It's Schedule F2, and let's see, it would be,
Oh, here it is, okay.
yeah,
It's page 29.
right. And it shows an ending cash balance of $7.3 million. But if you go up and look and see how much actual cash was spent on our acquisition of capital assets, $244,000. It's like $5 million that was budgeted for capital acquisition, which is going to have to be spent because it was budgeted. It's going to be spent in this fiscal year. And then we also have this year's capital improvement project. So that, Darren, I realizes that his cash, it looks really good, but it's not good. Because we held off $5 million of capital acquisitions. So I think this is another reason the study is going to be critical for water. We're just not getting the revenue.
Darren, do you have any comment you want to make?
No, Member Spell spoke it perfectly. Just, we don't want the numbers, the lines match, but yeah, it's what we're spending. It's in the bank because we haven't spent it yet, but it's committed for, and we just need to understand that when we look at this bottom line, that money is committed for, that cash is going to go away. And this is, looking at 18, so he spoke it well.
Right, that's a great point. And the other thing to note also is that the water fund for several years in a row did not meet its financial policies and therefore had no money to spend on capital expenditures. So the water fund especially has a buildup of projects that need to be done that are, for all intents and purposes behind schedule because in the past they didn't have the money. And so that's just something to think about going forward and for planning purposes. So yes, right now the picture looks pretty, but they do have a lot of projects that they didn't pay for last year that were budgeted. If you're ready, I can move on to stormwater drainage.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. If there's more questions, please just feel free to stop me and I can go back as well and review some of these. So moving on to the stormwater drainage fund then, we'll just kind of briefly cover this as well. And the total revenue of $1.7 million was higher than budget by about $91,000. And that's kind of split almost evenly, pretty closely between charges for services and non-operating income. Total expenses of $1.3 million are under budget by about $80,000, kind of spread evenly through salaries and services and supplies depreciation. So overall, in the stormwater drainage fund, positive net change in net position of $426,000. And taking a look at it from the financial policy perspective, the first thing you'll note is that huge green bar is a giant spike due to the bond proceeds that we received in the stormwater fund in April, most of which has not been spent yet. So it obviously kind of skews the graph here, but I'll go through the numbers and let you know that the operating reserve was calculated to be about $77,000, which was met. The capital reserve, 2% of capital assets, is $181,000, which we obviously meet because we have so much cash right now. And then the system reinvestment funding goal of $283,000. When you remove the bond proceeds of $4.8 million, then we still meet our system reinvestment funding goal, which turns out to be $734,000 is our actual number, and the goal was $283,000, so we met that goal as well. And then our debt to equity ratio, of course, we're not in compliance because of the bond that was issued in April. And that will right itself over the next several years as we start to pay down principal debt. And our debt service coverage goal was 1.0, and we met that with 1.6. So that covers my presentation of the funds, and are there any questions?
Yeah, Pam. The significant funds from the bond on stormwater, will those be spent here soon, or are they already been spent? Do you know? Because we're not having any problems with arbitrage, are we?
No, we're not. And I believe they have projects ongoing right now.
Yes, for the record, Darren Schultz, the majority of the bond was for the Curry Street project and the South Carson Street project. And the Curry Street project is wrapping up, so we'll finish that billing here in the next couple months. And then South Carson is under design, but almost $3.5 million is going to that project as well. So that won't actually won't be built won't be charged probably till 2020 in terms of the contractor putting in the installation of it. But so that bond money is going to sit in that account for a couple more years, the majority of it.
Will that get us in any trouble with arbitrage sitting there that long?
We have 3 years to spend the money.
Any other questions?
Pam and really Darren and Eddie. Andy, you're good on this one. On the water, I'm looking at the financial policies, and over the years from 2015 to the estimated 2018, under the capital reserve goal with the net capital assets, there's an increase of $101 million to 103 million from 2015 to 2016. And then it goes down the next 2 years. And going back to what we talked about earlier, is that assets coming offline?
Yeah, without going back and, looking to see exactly what happened, that would be the most likely, explanation. Those numbers, that 2% of, that goal is calculated as 2% of the capital, which comes right off of our CAFR. So it's really just, and so if we'd have to go back and take a look at our, what our assets were in the past and what disposals or additions we had, et cetera, but that would be the most likely explanation, yes.
At the risk of confirming everybody's suspicion, what is CAFR?
I'm very sorry. That's our annual financial statement that we, for the whole city, is our comprehensive annual financial statement citywide.
Okay, are there any other questions from the committee? Any more comments from staff? If not, we'll move on to Darren. And this is the update on the RFP and the...
Yes. So an update on the water, the wastewater, and the stormwater rate refresh. This was asked to be brought forward at this meeting just to give a kind of a snapshot as to where we are and where we're going. And I'm going to let Andy speak a little bit to this. Incidentally, Andy won't tell you this, but he just wrapped up a rate refresh for the city of Sparks before he came to Carson. So he is really, really good at this. So
No pressure.
timing couldn't be better. If you read through the staff summary, I'm not going to rehash all of that, but as I've spoken in the past, really what we're trying to do is we did a very comprehensive rate study in 2012, 2013, and out of that we've got some new financial policies. We got a new utility financial oversight committee, and we've got a 5-year phase-in policy for those rates. Now that we're in 2018, 2019, I think it prudent that we go back and not revisit the whole study, but revisit the assumptions and the projections that were made during that time and compare them to actuals to where we are now and discuss that and see where it falls. So the intent with what we're doing with this RFP is to hire a consultant that would perform that work for the water and the wastewater fund. In addition to that, you'll remember that we focused mainly on water and wastewater at the time, and then it wasn't until later where we said, well, what about stormwater? And so staff made an effort to bring a stormwater rate and program forward that would meet the needs of the fund now and into the future, and it required an increase of rates. That was successful at this committee, but it was not successful at our Board of Supervisors in that they didn't necessarily deny the need for a rate increase, but they wanted us to look at the stormwater fund and go look at the rate structure all the way back down to square zero. So how is it that we are charging properties for stormwater in Carson City, and is the method we're using the right method? That was not an effort that staff could undertake. So at that time, it was recommended that when we do a rate refresh for the water and sewer fund, that at that point we would look at the stormwater fund and their rates. So The RFP that is currently being advertised is for a consultant to do a refresh on the water and wastewater side, and on the stormwater side to go all the way down to the beginning and start that process again in terms of how we are charging and why we are charging the rates. Once that gets established, then talk about the fund and making it sustainable into the future in terms of its needs for capital and or operation. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy here, but to date, what we've done is we've developed the RFP. It is on the street asking for qualified consultants to submit and to apply for it, and then we'll move forward with carrying that out. And I think Andy is prepared to talk a little bit more about the schedule.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Again, for the record, Andy Hummel, wastewater utility manager. As far as the schedule goes, the RFPs are actually due tomorrow, the 28th. We're looking at the month of December to review those, select our consultant, do the negotiations for that contract, and then take to the Board of Supervisors in early January. And then looking at schedule of this committee for next year for the first meeting, whether that's February, March timeframe, bring that a status update in that timeframe, and then in the May timeframe, hopefully with our final results of that effort. As Darren indicated, the stormwater utility rate is our main focus on this one. That methodology of how those charges get applied, kind of the big question hanging out there.
Does that complete your presentation? Okay. Questions, Mike?
Yeah. When did you expect to get it to the Board of Supervisors, Andy?
For the consultant selection in early January, if we have any, any major changes, whatever's going to be the final product, we would like that in place for July of next year. So that would put us June timeframe to bring it to Board of Supervisors for the final.
Any other questions? Randy, did you?
Andy and Darren, was there a pre-proposal meeting with any interested consultants or proposers?
There wasn't a formal meeting that we had set up. We've all had a number of inquiries from consultants asking about, what it is we're trying to do here, that sort of thing. So we know there's some interest out there, but it wasn't a formal meeting.
I guess the question that I have from my experience is always, in submitting a proposal, you can be more accurate by knowing what the owner wants. But here it looked like proposers only could talk to the purchasing division. Is that true?
In terms of specific questions about the proposal, what's due during that time period, we try to keep it pretty clamped down with staff so that one individual's not getting a bunch more information than somebody else. So in terms of the specific proposal and what's to be in there, all that needs to go through purchasing and not be directed at staff. 30,000 high-level sort of input, we're able to provide that, and we did talk to several people about it, and it was at the level of kind of what I just explained here in this meeting. Water, wastewater is at this level, stormwater is much more soup to nuts, that sort of effort. We tried to, in the RFP, give as much information about what's been done in the past and then what this study would do moving forward. I think it's probably the best RFP we've ever written. I'm just kidding, Randy.
Thank you.
Just kind of an observation, from trying to put my committee hat on here. I think this is a really important study, a really important project, because we have just finished the 5th year of a rate increase that was programmed with the original work for water and sewer. We see that in sewer we're beginning to get to be in better shape financially. Water is still upside down, and as you mentioned, Pam, there's capital budget items that have been delayed. Other items continue to be added to the pot of capital improvement needs in the water fund particularly, that we haven't addressed. And I'm hopeful that the process can include trying to educate people regarding the value and the need for the ongoing funding of the utility, not in terms of a huge change in rates or something like that, but more in terms of you really have to look at a sustainable way of funding and financing your enterprise funds. And obviously, most of that, if not almost all of it, comes from ratepayers. But there are different ways to do that, and I think the rate refresh can look at some of those things. Obviously, you can look at rate structures and that sort of thing. We see with the economy, I mean, the increase in rates, we see reductions in uses. So if you're not careful, your rate increase reduces your demand, which reduces your income, which creates other problems. So I'm hopeful that this can be a process that isn't necessarily in the corner and all of a sudden comes back to the Board of Supervisors, presumably through this committee, but we're going to need to bring folks along in the community, I think, and in the at the elected level, and I think that's really going to be important if we're going to be successful in what I hope is maybe developing a more sustainable process with regard to rates, rather than this periodic hiatus or this periodic consultant review discussion. And consultants are extremely, economical and useful, but we don't want to use them too much. And at the same time, there may be some sustainable ideas that the board would consider favorably that would allow for a longer-term perspective and a better planning perspective from a financial position. So, no other comments, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bruce. A lot of what you said is exactly the same way I feel, and I agree with you. I'm looking at this schedule, excuse me, on page 62, and you have here contract negotiations in December 2018, and then Board of Supervisors awards contract January 3rd. So I'm confused as to how you can do the contract negotiations if somebody hasn't been selected by the Board of Supervisors.
So the process is we will select the consultant based off of qualifications, and once that happens, then we sit down with the selected consultant and we start the negotiations to develop a contract. So that process includes developing a scope, and then they provide what the fees are as related to that scope. And that's where the negotiation happens between the consultant, the contractor, and the staff in terms of what that looks like and how much it costs. Eventually, we end up with something that we accept that it's appropriate, and then that's the document that we would bring to the Board of Supervisors for the award of the contract in January. Can we get that all done in December? Well, we'll see.
Well, I guess I have two concerns. First of all, I'd like this committee to be informed as we go along. In fact, once you've made a selection and so forth, I'd be interested in seeing the bids, and I know that they're not in public information until such time as you've made an award or that I know that the Board of Supervisors will be expecting to see the bid material also, as they did in the negotiations with the garbage proposal and so forth. And so I guess that's a little bit of my concern, is that is how exactly that's going to operate if the board decides they want to see the bids and make the decision themselves somewhat.
Oh, Madam Chair, that would be, I think, the first time that this ever happened. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but the standard operating procedure is that staff goes through and brings the recommendation forward to the Board of Supervisors for award. They often ask us questions as to how we came to the conclusions we did, but then they either award it to that, or they tell us, no, go back out and redo this and see if the results are different. So in my time here, I've never brought all of them and asked the board to make the selection, nor have they wanted to do that.
The times, they are changing. So we'll see. As I say, I think this committee is going to be very interested in following this closely as we move along. And if anybody on the committee disagrees with me, say so, because I think this is one of the issues that this committee is most interested in, and one of the major reasons we were formed is for the benefit of the ratepayers, and therefore we really we understand your needs, we want to meet your needs too, but we also need to be looking out for the ratepayers. And, and I know there's many different ways on judging stormwater rates. I think it's Oregon bases their rates on how much rain comes off roofs. And they measure roofs and so forth. So whether or not that would work in Carson City, I have no idea, but I know there's many different ways of doing it. So, so somewhere in there, Andy, figure us in, if you could, please. We'd like to be kept abreast, I think, of things as they move along, and I know you have a committee, that I presume you have a committee that's formed that will be looking at these bids and making that decision. Bruce?
One final comment. The successful conclusion and implementation of this study could conceivably initiate the demise of the need for this committee. So that could be a real goal for staff.
Let me say out loud what Randy said under his breath, which was, there's a carrot. So, okay. Any other comments on this?
I just want to, Madam Chair, I received your comments, and I believe I understood. I would kind of see this going forward in a similar fashion the way the last one did with our previous rate consultant, FCS, and the regular presentations that they made to this committee. Is that what you had in mind, or are you thinking differently?
Excuse me, Darren, we weren't formed at that time.
You're right. You're right. Not for the. That would be for the connection charges, the connection fees, the rate study that went into that was vetted through this committee, and checking in, presenting, that sort of thing. In my mind, that's kind of how I had it pictured. Did that sound? Was that about right?
I agree.
Okay. Okay.
So I think we're on the same wavelength there. Okay. So if we're, any other things on the RFP? If not, then let's move ahead to Darren's report.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn this over to Eddie and Andy, because they are the new managers of the two funds here. We are not talking too much about stormwater because there's not a lot to say. I will just cover a couple of highlights of stormwater, and then I'm going to let them talk a little bit about water and wastewater. On the stormwater side, as part of the bonds that were mentioned earlier, we had a number of what we called small projects that were funded that we felt were of an immediate need to fix. And basically what those are is, when it rains, we always know around town, these are 15 locations where we have to send personnel to deal with flooding and clogged pipes, etc. And so the goal of the small projects that we were going to try and fix with approximately $600,000 of that funds was to try and go after a few of those high-frequency areas that require manpower during a storm. So that has went forward over the last 6 months, and we've worked on several of them. We have several more in the works and several more to finish. So I want you to know that money is being spent, changes are being made. We will recognize some of those changes the first big storm we get. It will be evident in terms of help that we are providing in terms of manpower operations during a storm. So that's moving forward. The remainder of the funds, like I say, were for big capital projects that were involved with various segments of Carson Street. As part of Carson Street, I'm also referring to the flooding that happens at the mall, the Carson Mall, and then across, out to the linear ditch, that whole area. That's all part of what was funded with that bond. Parts of it are designed. None of that has yet been constructed, but it's all planned to over the next couple of years. So that's moving forward, and away we go. So I'll turn it over to Eddie. You can talk about water.
All right, Eddie Qualieri for the record, Water Utility Manager. And I was planning on going through kind of a snapshot of what's going on in the water world for Carson City, starting with personnel. Then I was going to go through kind of a 30,000-foot level planning projects that I'm working on, and then a quick summary on the 10,000-foot level of projects that we want to get done this year that are a little more specific. So starting with personnel, not to start with bad news, but we have a few retirements coming up, which is inevitable. Rit Palmer, one of our operations supervisors, been with the city for a long time, is retiring planning in July of 19. So that's a big hit to the water side. I'm currently working with him, passing down his knowledge to me and all his duties to me so that I understand them and can carry them on. So we meet every once in a while and do that. And then also Nick Brown's not too far away. He's the distribution supervisor, another huge asset to the city. He's probably 2 years out. So I'm meeting with the operators and grooming, for lack of a better term, the next Nick and Rit for the future. So that's in place right now, and we're having monthly meetings to start that process and find those right people that can pass the torch to. So moving on to the 30,000-foot level. Quill has been kind of on the top of our minds. As you probably are aware, it's the surface water treatment plant at Quill, which takes water from Kings, Ash, and then the Marlette Hobart water system, has recently come into stricter EPA guidelines, which has forced us to shut off certain water supplies. So we're currently not taking water from Ash. We're currently not taking water from the Marlette and Hobart reservoirs. We're still taking water from the East Slope catchments, which come through the Marlette Hobart water system. So Kings and the East Slope water catchment we're down to. So it's dwindling in supply, which a planning project I'm working on is pursuing an engineering report to see what our options are to bring some of those supplies back online. It's a combination of things, but it's mostly EPA-driven, stricter guidelines on surface water treatment. We're also looking at the possibility of a possible new induction well on the river with some other partners, and seeing the benefits to the system on a regional scale as well as for Carson City, and trying to find opportunities for another induction well, since peak demands in the summer. We can operate our Carson River surface rights in the summer, which really helps with demand. They're usually good wells. Our 2 wells there are good producing wells and service really well. So we're looking at that as a future planning project. And I wanted to go over a couple planning areas that we've been looking at more in depth, which is South Carson, the Voltaire zones, the upper and lower Voltaire zones. There's a lot of growth coming into those zones, so we've been taking a closer look at our infrastructure and developer needs for further developments in those areas. Another area of on our study list is the East Valley Zone, the zone that takes water from East Carson Tank up to Highway 50 Tank. That area is getting more and more growth potential. So we're looking at the possibilities of what we can serve there and if we can meet demands in the future for build out, which we're looking good in both zones. We're looking at possibly some booster pump upgrades to the booster pump stations in those both zones to make capacity, or to meet capacity. So now dropping down to more of the 10,000 foot level. These are projects that we're looking at planning for this next year. One is the east-west connection portion of the Minden Town Water. That's bringing it from Washington Street, where it currently dead ends, all the way up to Quill Treatment Plant. So that'll bring that source of water to Quill, which we can then bring it up to Ash Canyon or Ash Tanks, which then can get into the entire system. So that's an important piece of that interconnection. And then the plans are at the 90% level, and we're looking at going to bid in late spring of 19 and construction in sometime in the summer of 19. So that's a big push right now for our office. A couple other small projects. Gonai Canyon Tank, we're looking at a rehabilitation to that tank. It's in pretty poor shape, rusting and wearing out. It's in dire need of rehabilitation. So that's one project we're looking at. We're looking at a re-drill on well 3. That'll be actually the third re-drill on that site. But it's a good producer, good quality water in the location. I think we can get some more capacity out of that for future demand. We have a few well rehabs for pumps, one particularly in well 9 at the park. We have a well plugging. We sold off some rights in well 12, which is our only well in Washoe Valley Basin, groundwater basin. We still need to plug that well. So another update is the Stewart facility is going to be ours soon. The state is installing new water mains throughout the whole Stewart Indian colony, and they are going to donate the facilities to us, and we will serve each individual building on meters throughout the Stewart facility. So that's a project that we've been involved with the state. They're currently looking at this spring for construction. Currently have a review on their construction plans right now. We've been involved in the whole process, making sure we protect our system. There's a lot of things going on in that area as far as old water systems intermingling, so making sure we don't have any cross-contamination for our system has been our main focus for it. And that wraps up my presentation on the snapshot for the water system.
That's excellent, Eddie. Thank you. I appreciate that. The committee, are there any questions from anyone? All right, Andy?
Okay. Again, Andy Hummel, wastewater utility manager. On the wastewater side, starting with personnel, recent retirements, Randall Gray, our treatment plant manager, retired about 3 weeks ago. Had the pleasure of working with Randall for about 5 years early in my career at Sparks, so it was a quick reintroduction and nice transition to be able to have him here at least for a few weeks as I started. Jennifer Lopez is our new operations supervisor out at the plant and doing very well in that role. We have another retirement on the horizon. We haven't gotten commitment on a date yet, so I won't say a name, but in the collection system side, so very similar to Eddie, we're watching that position and being prepared to do that transition. And then on the personal side as well, the reclamation facility was recently awarded with the Phase 1 project, APWA, American Public Works Association Project of the Year. So it was nice to get some recognition for staff there and their efforts behind that recently at the Board of Supervisors level. Speaking of the plant, that project, Phase 2, is underway. They're about 20% complete there. Currently working mostly on the headworks type facilities, the electrical building, that type of stuff, currently constructing that. Lift stations, looking at a couple of rehabs. We moved one up on the priority list, the Empire lift station. That one's been giving a lot of problems. Control systems, basically the floats, and there have been a lot of issues lately. So moved that one up, that kind of thing. If that fails, can put sewage on the ground and cause some problems. So plans are ready on that one, bidding it probably right after the first of the year. And then also looking at our South Lift station, some controls improvements there to better utilize the capacity we have in that station. Our sewer annual rehab projects, Ann Street is about 90% design. That one should go to bid probably in January as well. And then also looking at sewer, water, and roadway on Airport Road. That one's more developer-driven, kind of pushing that project forward a little quicker than we had thought, but that one's starting on design. On the reclaim side, Eagle Valley, we're looking at the re-roof and pump station upgrades. That one, contractor is underway. They're going to actually start their work next week on that. And then Empire Ranch, the meter there, got a design from our consultant, and it'll be one that we tackle in the spring with our staff, about a $20,000 new meter, some upgrades to make that read correctly. And then some work with Brunswick Canyon with the dam, looking at valving and assessments on that, as well as the emergency action plan. I have a consultant that started on that to make sure we're in compliance with the state engineer's office, who actually permits the dam for us. And then as a kind of a high level standpoint, the first thing that Darren has tasked me with is our long-term options on disposal of our treated effluent out of the plant. We're a 100% reuse system. The water we produce gets reused, but as we all know, in a drought, that puts a strain on that system, as well as our domestic supply potentially. And in wet years, we may not be able to get rid of enough water. So looking at long-term options and resiliency there, just reviewing the history behind the system and the permits and agreements, so that we can get an RFP out to get a consultant looking more detail on that for us. And that is my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. What you just talked about as far as getting a consultant in to look at the history of the effluent and the permits and so forth, I think there's been a number of studies done on that, and Bruce could probably give us more information on that than anybody. I think he's lived through it all. Bruce?
Well, there, as all three of you guys know, there's lots of history there. And I think part of the issue is to look past the current short-term situation and into the longer term. This past year, as we've heard, we've been able to pretty much eliminate the contributions from the water system to the sewer system to offset the shortage in effluent. But long-term, there are a number of things that have been kicked around, and I know there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of alternatives, but if I understand what you're trying to do here, Andy, is trying to take everything that's out there and kind of bring it current, and then look forward with current conditions, current projections of supply, I guess, if you would, and also determine if there are long-term planning implementation matters that should be considered, for the effluent. And I assume that's pretty much what you're trying to do, not another study, but rather taking the information that's out there and really looking forward with it.
Yeah, exactly. There's been a lot of great work done over the years, and that's kind of been my initial task, is reviewing that history and our permit situation with the state. The Division of Environmental Protection actually permits the discharge of that water, and that's a ever-moving target over the years. So, yeah, it's what's been done to date and how do we use that projecting forward into the future to keep Carson in a good position moving forward, kind of build that resiliency. You know, if we lost a golf course, for example, or water use changes, that impacts the amount of water we'd have to use. So having those options is key for the future.
Excellent. And you'll find that this committee, both individually and as a group, has been very much involved in these issues over the years, and so also has some history on these things. And just using the phrase "lose a golf course," that can create a lot of commentary in Carson City. And so you'll get to know these things, various hot buttons and so forth that make for fun times. So, excellent report. Thank you.
That concludes. I'm very, very excited that Andy and Eddie have joined the team here, and I think it's going to serve the public very, very well into the future. So the future looks bright in terms of management there. So that concludes.
I agree. Yeah, sure, Randy.
As Darren, as you're building your staff, I'd just like to compliment you on hiring Andy. I've known Andy for a long time, and it's a great addition to the city, and Andy joins a great operation, so it's a marriage made in heaven. Well done.
Thank you, Randy.
From carrots to marriages.
I've got a list of them.
Okay, so we evidently have some time. It's just 2:00. So let's move ahead to one of the things I believe in, and I'm glad that Darren's doing the same thing, and that is that at a certain point in time, I think it's good to look back and say, okay, here's where we came from, here's what we've accomplished, here's what we haven't accomplished, what do we want to do in the future, how do we want to move forward, and we're not going to take any action on this. This is just more sort of to talk and, get everybody's head wrapped around it a little bit. I know, so if we go back to the very first meeting that this committee ever had, the room was packed with the public. Everybody and their brother was here because the rates had just been raised. There was a committee out there that had already gone to the judge and asked for a grand jury investigation into Public Works. There was a lot of distrust and anger out there. And so the board appointed this committee, which is what Oversight is, different than any other committee this city had, because staff could not speak for us. It'd be like having people who were audited come give the report for the auditor, okay? It doesn't work that way. This committee had to be independent and separate from staff while working with staff, which was a challenge for Public Works. Nobody had ever done this before. This was a whole different new project. And we had to feel our way, and I think, we've made some mistakes, we made some progress. It was tough for staff, it was tough for us, trying to find a working relationship that was agreeable to everyone. And, I think that we've had some successes, such as the ordinance that's going to help people to pay their rates, and that we forgot to bring that up before, Darren, in your report. For the committee, I'll diverge a little bit because it's part of my report. You recall we voted here to have a new ordinance to help people who couldn't pay their water and sewer bills and so forth. And at the same time, we discovered there were people who were getting a break that shouldn't, that was going to give money back into the water fund. I think it was about $60,000, something like that. Unfortunately, that didn't take effect yet, and so we haven't seen the money come in, but I understand letters will be going out to those people, and so at some point there will be a small addition back into the water fund from that. And but the Board of Supervisors approved the new ordinance, and anybody who'd like a copy of it, let me know, and I'll make sure you get one. And so that will be moving forward. And then I think the bond that gave us the money for the east-west connection, that's the kind of efficiency I like to see happen, because we are actually saving money in the long run and using it efficiently and effectively. And that's the kind of thing that I think we can say to ratepayers, hey, look how your money's being utilized, in good ways. And we're not spending it on things that it shouldn't be spent on, because that's essentially why we're here. So, committee, I'd like to hear your comments, your thoughts, whatever. Bruce, thank you.
Sure, Madam Chair. One of the areas that's been important to me is the consideration, and in my mind, is still a project in need of further implementation regarding connection fees. I think that this committee has had some impact on the adjustment in those connection fees to begin to bring them a little bit higher on a progressive basis. And I think potentially that is one of the items that may come out of the rate refresh as well. But to me, that's another important element that is, in my mind, a work in progress, but I think still has some ways to go, personally.
I concur 100% with Bruce. And in fact, after listening to Eddie, I keep hearing more development, more development, more development. We're sitting with a water fund that has no money. We need new infrastructure. We need treatment. And then Bruce, I think, said the best thing ever. If we can find a stable, systematic process that will work, you won't need us. I just don't see any need for this committee, because the number one complaint is water rates. And it's a catch-22 system. I'm going to charge you more if you use more. Well, I'm not going to use more. It's counterproductive to funding capital reserves. So we have to keep that in mind, I think, with this study. Is growth going to pay for growth? We're not going to pay for it through rates. You want to tie into our system, you're going to pay the price. Personally, when I saw that the connection fees were dropped to $750 2 years after I paid $3,000 for mine. Why? I never balked at $3,000. I was part of doing the business. We got to get away from, let's save every little nickel and dime for economic growth. We have to be reasonable about all this stuff. So we have to, I think, not just rates. What can we get if we want to keep growing? And that's the push in this state now. Economic development, more growth. How are we going to get growth to pay for growth?
Randy?
I can't do anything but support, what each and every one of you said. It's, I think the stability of the rates is so important, but coupled with that is the consistency, so that whether it's a new resident or a developer coming in, they know that what to expect over the years, so that something isn't changed 6 months after it's enacted or recommended to the board. I think there has to be consistency, which I think we've accomplished. The other thing I want to do is to describe it as a committee. I think it's important as Andy, you mentioned is that we provide oversight. I think the worst thing that we could do is to go down the rabbit hole and start managing what is Darren's responsibility. And I think that Darren's done a bang-up job, and if there's anything that we can help provide input on, review any recommendations that Public Works is going to make to the board, that's our job, and we're happy to do it. But to drill down and become a manager, or to offer experience or judgments on items beyond our purview, I think would be inappropriate. So I think we've gone down the road where we should be going. So I think we've made great progress.
Darren? Darren, you don't have to comment if you don't want to.
Yeah, I've been taking notes, Madam Chair, and then that's kind of what I want to do here. And then, in terms of moving forward, I don't know, Madam Chair, what you think of the time. Do we have a discussion with the Board of Supervisors in terms of what, like you say, this was developed, it was put into motion. There was very little guidance given as to what to do, right? And so, do we owe it to them to check back in, or would that discussion? I don't know if that's relevant or not. So, but I'm taking notes of what's being said here, and I'm listening.
I know that I've heard from various members of the Board of Supervisors as we've gone along, the mayor and other people too, and I don't ask, because of the open meeting law, I don't ask Mike who he's talking to, I don't ask Bruce who he's talking to, I don't ask Randy who he's talking to, whether or not the people that appointed you get in touch with you. I have no idea. I know that Karen appointed me, and we've kept in touch, and and I've heard from other members of the Board of Supervisors, and so, that's, so far when I've gone in to give reports, I think one time I heard complaints, but other than that, in general, they've been very complimentary to this committee, and everything is presented as a committee. It's the entire committee that does things, not any individual person on the committee. I think of this as a whole. And the board's been very pleased. So I know there have been some comments about, well, we offer cover for the board. I don't think so. I don't think that we've done that. I think what we have done is the work that the board wants to see done that they don't have time for. And where they wanted a little more drilling down on the on all these numbers and so forth, and they don't always have time for it. So that's what we're here for. There was, we go back 5 years, there was a lot of concern about snow plows. I don't know if you remember that or not, Darren. Everybody was concerned because the water fund was paying for snow plows, and was that needed? And that's why we have some engineers on this committee and not just accountants, to look and see whether or not the equipment that was being bought was appropriate for that fund to pay for. So, so as far as some drilling down, Randy, that's the kind of thing they were looking to us to do. So I don't recall that. I think we solved the snowplow problem, and I don't think there have been any other problems since, because I think we just didn't understand how many snowplows were needed in Carson City. So, that's how you find out. You go and ask, and then you learn from that. So I agree. I think at some point the board will decide what they want to do with this committee, how they see it moving forward. Do you recall our initial resolution had us expiring after 5 years? And then when we redid the resolution, the board took that out. And now we serve at their pleasure. So this committee could be gone next week if the board so decided. So, but I want everybody here to know how much I appreciate all of you and the time and effort that you've given on this committee. So, and as I say, I think this rate study is an important point for this committee, to move forward on. And so that the ratepayers know and understand that somebody's looking out for them at the same time that we're working on possibly raising rates again. So, and I agree with you, Bruce, on the connection fees. That's something that, from the first meeting we had, we talked about the connection fees. So, are there any other comments from anybody?
I would just add that I haven't heard from anybody, at my level from the board that, feels that the change is needed or, what are we doing? So it's nothing that I know of. And I want to echo what you said. I think it's extremely valuable to them. I don't think they consider it as cover. They consider it as, especially as related to rate and rate increases, that there is 5 people from the public, not elected, that are vetting this, who will be paying these rates, and that understand it, the whole story, because there's no way we can explain to everybody in the public what we explain to you, but understand the whole story and vet that, and then, come up with a recommendation. And your recommendation doesn't always match our recommendation. We know that, and that's how it should be. But I think that's extremely valuable to the Board of Supervisors. So.
All right. I guess now we talk about future meetings.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. What I did was look at what we've done the previous 2 years. I also talked to finance briefly. The real pretty hard and fast dates, the 2 that we need to kind of work with the financial schedule, is the meeting that we typically hold in March, which is where finance presents the preliminary budget numbers to this committee. And then we come back in May and present what the actuals were. So the March and the May dates are kind of the hard, fast ones that we need to stick with. The other ones we just kind of fit in, and we've kind of almost been a quarterly type of thing. I did pull the calendar for this room for 2019 so that we could discuss that if we wanted today. In light of the discussion on the one of the big things that'll be happening this winter and into spring will be the rate discussion. So I'd like to plan these meetings to kind of coincide with that. Having said that, March and May are perfect for that schedule. If we can kick them off in January, March would probably be the earliest where they would have something to come and present, and then again in May. So I think those 2 dates really fall into that place. Then it's a matter of the rest of the year and whatever might be your pleasure. If we just started in March, and finance said that the latter part of March, the later we go in March, the more accurate of budget information that can be presented. So, for instance, the Tuesday, the 26th of March, this room is open all afternoon, if that's an option for people.
By afternoon, you mean from 1 o'clock until?
Yeah, the meeting's not booked until 6 p.m. that day, so we could have the whole afternoon if and I would reserve it as such, especially if we're going to be talking about rates and presentations. I'd want to block it off for 4 or 5 hours. I don't know how long that would take, but it's open.
We can take a break.
Should I tentatively pencil the 26th of March at 1 p.m.? Okay. All right, and then we go from there to 2 months later, which would be May, and that's real real budget time. This year, we held it on May 21st. And on calendar year 2019, May 21st is a Tuesday, and again, this room is wide open the whole afternoon. So is that acceptable for everybody?
Yep.
Okay.
I don't think we'll be in town. We have an audit, we have a governmental training that day.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, let's move around because we definitely need you here.
We can do the 14th or the 28th.
The 28th, this room is open.
Okay.
Anytime before 6 p.m. So would
Okay.
that
That would work.
That's okay, not too late or anything?
Yep, that would work.
Okay.
Tuesday.
That's Tuesday, May 28th at 1 p.m. Okay, and then we got together, officially, we got together in 18 in August and November. After May, we may need to meet again to talk about more rate stuff, possibly in June or July, but I won't know that until we really start having conversations with the consultant. So we could either schedule something now or wait and schedule it later, whatever you think.
You know, I think it's important that we get as much input from the consultants on what they're doing as possible. So maybe it would be better to wait until the May meeting and set that
Okay,
follow-up meeting.
okay,
If all we do is the rate consultant at the meeting in June or July, whatever, we wouldn't need 6 hours or 5 hours. We'd only need it a couple
Right,
of hours
right.
max. So
and we might even, on the March 26th meeting, it might be necessary to hold an April meeting with the consultant too. You know, but we won't know that till they get here and talk to us. Okay, so.
well, our resolution calls for 4 meetings. We can meet more often
Right,
than that.
correct. Okay, so I have March and May, and then we typically get together to kind of talk about the year closing stuff. This year, we met in the end of August, and then again here the end of November. Should we stick to that schedule, budget-wise? Is that?
You know, as I recall, I think somebody else had a problem making last November's meeting. You know, we're so close to Thanksgiving is the problem. When is Thanksgiving next year? Does anybody have a calendar in front of them? Sherry's got her iPhone. Her trusty iPhone has everything.
Well, I cut
I
down a
believe it's the
tree.
21st and the 22nd next year.
28th.
It's the 28th and
late.
29th? Okay,
It's
it's
late,
later.
yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, there it is. Sorry.
Okay.
So should we
Good.
plan for the week before Thanksgiving?
Okay, let's do the week before.
Okay, so on Tuesday, the 19th, the Planning Commission is in this room. So we either need to do it on Monday, the 18th, or Wednesday, the 20th. All afternoon are open on those 2 days. Is Monday or Wednesday preference to anybody?
They're both important.
We have a Board of Supervisors on the 21st, Thursday, the day after,
Let's
but
do Monday.
Monday, the 18th, November 18th at 1 p.m. And then I just wonder if we should suggest, rather than August, in terms of the budget, and kind of looking back at the previous year, which we typically do, August is so soon after July, should we maybe look at September?
That's fine, but we still will not have,
Right.
you know, we'll have some numbers to present, but they will not be anywhere close to what our final numbers will be for the year at that point.
Okay. Any preference between May and November for anybody?
Between May and November?
Well, if we were to schedule one more meeting between May and November, is there any preference as to when that should be? It doesn't sound like budget-wise, finance-wise,
When
it
do you
makes
think
much
we'll
of a
get
difference.
more information from the consultants?
Probably, we won't know that until we get here to the March timeframe, so,
What about a September meeting?
okay? September, the latter part, from the 17th on, it looks pretty, there's a lot of dates open. So the 17th, if we're looking for Tuesdays, the 17th and 24, this room is open.
Preference, anybody?
Yeah, I don't think it matters, so we've kind of been typically going the end of the latter part of the month. How about the 24th? September 24th, 1 p.m. So I have March 26th, May 28th, September 24, November 18, all at 1 p.m.
Those sound good to me, and I think they're spaced appropriately, so that, and as we said, if there's, we can always call a short meeting to get an update from the consultants if need be, particularly if you want our input on any direction or anything.
Absolutely. That very well could happen,
Or,
especially on the stormwater side.
or
of
if you
things.
don't want our input.
We won't call.
Yeah, right. That's fair. Okay. I think we're at that point now for more public comment. And I think, frankly, people, the empty room spells success. Okay? We don't have angry people in here screaming and shouting, so they trust us to look out for their interests. That being said, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Bruce so moved, and Randy seconded, and all in favor say, I gather there being no discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And there are no aye, and no, there are no nays. Thank you, everybody.